Hello, good people, and welcome to Finest Skills Hub. Here, we learn, we connect, and we grow. A few months ago, we created a full income statement dashboard in Microsoft Excel. Many of you practiced, you shared feedback. Why settle for one when you can have two? So, in this new year, we want to challenge ourselves and create that same income statement dashboard, this time around in Power BI. We are going to cover all the features and the skills you need to create that interactive Power BI income statement dashboard. I'll share the materials with you so you can practice along. If you are game, join me and let's start the process together.
Okay, so before we begin, here's a walk through our dashboard. On the left side, you have a summary of your income statement, comparing your current and previous numbers. So here I'm going into focus mode. So you realize that all my income statement lines are here. So I have my current numbers, I have my previous year, and then I have a column to show me the change for each category. Back to my report, I can now see the net income margin, which is a key measure. I can slice it by division. So let's say if I had products here, I could also slice by product. Okay, so you see the performance of a particular division or product. Okay, then beyond these two, we zoom into every category in the income statement, compare previous performance with current, see the change. If the change is unfavorable, it colors this in red. If it's favorable, it colors it in green. So in the case of revenue, we fell, so it's 36% down. For cost of goods sold, we saved in this current year, so it's 2% savings. Okay, so that is a story for each of these 9. Now, we created this using one fact table, which is the journal, which records our double entry transactions. Okay, and then we used the following dimension tables to describe our data. So we used the calendar, okay, the chart of accounts, and then the division. So these 3 will serve as dimension tables. Then to help us order our income statement properly, we'll bring in and create this layout, okay, which will help us assign our income statement calculations. So in the end, we'll achieve this interactive dashboard. Then regarding our measures, we went through it in 2 steps. So we calculated the main measures, as you can see here, and then later we calculate the key performance indicators for these 9 cards. Okay, so there's a lot in here. Join me and let's start the process. So before we begin, just a walk through our starting data set. So this is in Excel. This file has been shared. You can practice along. So it begins with a journal. So the journal basically records each transaction, date, the division, the description of the transaction, and then we have a double entry here. So for each transaction, we debit a particular account and we credit a particular account. So what it means is that every transaction sits on one row. Okay, so it is this we are going to use to create our trial balance, but we are going to rely on the chart of accounts. So the chart of accounts will give us attributes to analyze this. So we have our account code, we have our account here, we have income statement and balance sheet, whether the item is an income statement or a balance sheet item. We have our category here as well, debit or credit for each line, and then the account group. It can be more detailed than this, but essentially we are going to use this to create our slices and also our labels in the financials. So this is where we are going to start from. We'll load this into Power BI and then begin the analysis from there. So let's switch to Power BI. Okay, so for this case study, we are going to use Power BI Desktop. If you are new to Power BI Desktop is free. You can download it from the Microsoft Store. So this is what you get when you start a new session. So I'm going to close this, and this is how our working area looks like. So of course, with all Power BI projects, you would have to start with getting data. You can use any of these connectors to get the data. So I am going to get the data from the Excel workbook, what I just showed you earlier. So this is my Excel workbook. I'm going to open it. Okay, so when this opens up, initially I'm going to get a navigation pane to allow me to preview the contents I'm bringing in. So this is a navigator. So here, because I have two data sets, I'm able to click on it and then preview what I have here. So this is my chart of account. Clicking on this, I have the journal. Okay, so this is just a range of data. I didn't convert to a table, but Power BI is able to detect these two sets. So I'm going to commit this by checking the box for COA, and then I'll check the box for journal. If your data is clean, you can go ahead and load, but here we need to do some transformation on the data. So I'm going to choose transform data. So I'll click on transform data. So by doing this, you are going into Power Query. Okay, so Power Query allows us to transform, shape, and when we are done, we can close and apply our transformed queries for further calculations in the data model using DAX. So I have my chart of accounts. Usually when you bring in data as queries, it's important you go through each column to be sure that you have the right data in terms of the format, removing characters and all those things. So my steps, automatic steps have been applied here. I have my account code. This is fine. Account IS. What we need to focus on is actually the data type. So for this purpose, everything looks okay. Now let's go to our journal. So in our journal, we have our date, division, description, and because we used a double entry system where we had the data in one row, it will be ideal to rather have the type. Okay, so the type here means whether the transaction is a debit or credit in one column. Okay, if it sits in two columns, it's not going to be useful for our analysis. So the best way to do this is to highlight the debit and credit column. So I select the debit, hold down the shift key, right arrow, include a credit. Then I'll right click this and I am going to on pivot columns. Okay, so I'm collapsing these columns into rows. So this way the debit and credit goes into one column as an attribute. So this I'm going to name type. Okay, so for each transaction we have a double entry, right? So this is type, and then I'm going to name the value we have here account. Okay, now for our trial balance calculations, we want to negate one of these. Okay, so we want to negate all the debit entries and then let the credit entries remain positive. In some cases it's the other way around. So here what we are going to do is to add a custom column. So that custom column will give us the version of this amount column. So I'm going to go to add column. Okay, and then I'm going to add this custom column. So I'll click on custom column. So it allows me basically to use a calculation to derive the content of the new column. So let's name this TB amount. So over here the rule is simple. What we are going to say is that if the type is equal to debit, then negate it by multiplying by 1. If it is not, then maintain the positive number. So we are going to use an M code for this. So this is case sensitive, so you need to pay attention to that. So if square bracket type is equal to double quote DR, okay, then take square bracket amount and multiply it by -1, else, okay, square bracket, maintain the amount sign, which is positive. So just a simple if statement to give us a new column. Basically that's what we are doing here. We'll click OK. So when we click OK, we get this new TB amount. All debits have been negated, all credits positive. So it's always important you check the data type. So this is the data type to format the content of your column. So I'm going to format this as decimal. Okay, so now that we have this, I will have to go and remove the original column. Will not need this. I'll also remove this detailed description column. Will not need that as well. I'll remove these columns. All these steps are recorded. So if the data expands or shrinks, all these steps will be executed automatically. Okay, so at this point, we have our chart of accounts, we have our journal. But if you look in the dashboard, we also have our slicer for division. Okay, so the division is here. So we want to create a separate query for this division. We can do that by referencing or duplicating journal. So we'll right click the journal query and then we'll reference. This way it creates a copy and maintains a link to the original journal query. So here I'm only interested in the division. So I'm going to highlight this, right click and then remove other columns. So I'll remove all the other columns and then take off duplicates. So while this is here, right click and remove duplicates as well. Okay, so these have been recorded as well. I'm going to rename this query division. So I'm basically going to be using this as a slicer. Okay, so now beyond our division, we also need a dimension table that would help us create time intelligence calculations. So we want year-on-year calculations. So we need a dedicated calendar table that is going to give us the year, the month, quarter, and all those things that will be relevant in our dashboard. So to do that, I'm going to right click, go to new query, blank query. Okay, and here I'm going to use a custom M code to generate our calendar table. So it's going to be equal to number.from open bracket list.min open bracket. I'll go into the journal, okay, which is the query here, and then look for the column date. Okay, and then I'll close the bracket for list.min, close the bracket for number.from. So essentially what this is doing is we are creating a series of dates, okay, starting from the least date in the date column in the journal, right? So this is going to give us the beginning date. So I'm going to copy this, Control C, and then because it's a range, I'll bring 2 dots, okay, and then paste the same thing here. Instead of list.min, I'm going to be changing the min to max. That gives us an expanding dynamic end date as our data changes, right? So we want a list. So before you press enter, put curly brackets around this M code, okay, and then you press enter. So this gives you the list of dates from the journal, starting from the earliest to the latest. So from this list, you can now convert to a table. Okay, click OK, nothing here. Okay, so this is the first column in our calendar table. So let's now name this query calendar. Okay, so I'll come here and name this one date. Okay, format the data type properly with date. So I have this. Now let me add my date attribute. So selecting the date column, I'll go to add column. Okay, date. I would extract year from here. Okay, so this gives me the year, and then here I'm going to also go back, extract the month. So I have my month values. Okay, this we are going to use to sort our month names. So I'll select the date here again, go here, and then I'm going to choose name of month. Okay, so with this name of month, it will be good to abbreviate. So to do that, I'm under add column, so I'm going to switch to transform, which replaces the current column with the result. So while this is selected, I'll come here and then choose first 3 characters to extract. Okay, so I have this. Okay, so this now completes our 3-dimension tables against our fact table, which is the journal. So in Power BI, once you are done with this, you just go to home, okay, and then you close and apply. So after we close and apply, Our tables from Power Query are listed in the field section in the report view. Okay, so if you go to the data view, we can now have a detailed look at all the various fields in each column here. It's best practice to set this calendar as a date table. Okay, so usually you can select this and then mark as a date table. So we will now choose a column here, and then we'll commit the first column, which is date, and mark this as a date table. Okay, so this way we can easily use it for our time intelligence calculations. So we are going to go to the model view. So in the model view, we have our data model. So I'm going to fit to screen. So over here, you see that we have our 4 boxes representing our 4 queries. Now, our journal, as I mentioned earlier, is our fact table. So we are going to push it down here and then take our 3-dimension tables, division, chart of accounts, and calendar up here. So in the process, we are going to create a star schema. So Power BI already has chart of accounts connected to our journal. So you realize that account is connected to account here, and then division connected to division, one to many. That's the relationship we have. So we are left with a calendar. So I'm going to connect this using the default date column. Click and hold it, okay, and then drag it on top of the dates here. Okay, so once we do that, if I zoom in a bit, okay, so this is our star schema. So we have this done. So it's based on this that we are going to create all our calculations. Okay, so now that we are done, let's go back to our report view, and over here we are going to create a special table that would host all our measures. Okay, so an easier way to do that is to go to the modeling tab, and here we'll start a new table. So we'll click on a new table. When it opens up, we call this my measures. Okay, so this is equal to nothing because we don't want anything here. So I'll press enter and then it registers my measures. So this is the table we are going to put in all our calculations. When I open it up, you realize it has an idle column. So we first have to create one measure, and then we'll hide this column so that this moves up. Standard practice is to always have your calculation on top of your original fields. So now that we have our measures table created, we are going to proceed and create our first measure. Now I'll take you back to the structure of our journal. We have this TB amount, so we need to sum this column, which based on our double entry should give us 0. Okay, so we are going to create a sum on this amount. We'll call it reporting value. So you right click the my measures table to ensure that the measure will end up here. Click on new measure. Okay, so when I click on new measure, I'll call this reporting value is equal to sum of the journal table TB amount. Okay, so once I do this, I'll press enter and I've recorded my first measure. Okay, so now that this is here, I can now click on the idle column that we had earlier, right click it, and then I'll choose hide. Okay, so this way my measures table is now going to be on top of my original fields, and then I can add on other measures here. Okay, now let's test this reporting value by creating a sample trial balance. So to do that, we can use the matrix visual, which is similar to pivot tables in Excel. So I'll click on the matrix. It it inserts this placeholder. So my value is going to be the reporting value. So as I mentioned, this should give us 0. So you can now slice this using account from the chart of account. Okay, so when I do that, you see something close to a typical trial balance, which has our income lines and our balance sheet lines as well. Okay, so it's on this basis that we are going to do all our calculations and create our income statement. Okay, so apart from the account as row, I can also slice this with category. Okay, so when I slice this by category, put it in focus mode, this is what we have. So I have some income statement labels or lines here. So I have revenue, I have expense, I have finance cost, I have cost of goods sold. But what we are clearly missing are the subtotals like gross profit, EBIT, net income, and all those things. So we need to create this, and that is what we are going to do next. Okay, so I'm going to put a card. So I'll click on this. So the card would help us test all the calculations we are going to do. Our formula is going to be very simple. So we are going to use calculate. So I'm going to start this new measure on my measures table. So I'll go new measures. So the first one we are going to calculate is revenue. Okay, so this is the revenue that we are going to use to build our income statement. So revenue, let me just increase this a bit. So revenue is equal to calculate. So if you know how calculate works, it takes a certain expression, which could be an existing measure, and then it filters it based on the criteria that you provide from your tables. So here, because we have reporting value already, I'm going to bring a square bracket and call reporting value, which is going to be my expression. Okay, now I'll go into the chart of accounts to get my category. So I'm saying that for revenue, we are going to sum all items that are revenue from the category column. Okay, so this is going to be our revenue calculation. Okay, we are going to use this part, okay, to calculate the rest of the line. So I'm going to copy just this part and then I'll press enter. Okay, so if we did this correctly, what this means is that we should get 6714, which is our cumulative revenue. So I have my card here, I've selected it, and I'm going to check revenue. So that gives us 6.71 million abbreviated. Okay, so we are going to proceed on this and then create cost of goods sold as well. So again, my measures, new measure, so it opens up and I have cost of goods sold. Okay, so I'm going to paste this, still reporting value, but the criteria now is going to be cost of goods sold. Okay, so that is the measure for cost of goods sold. So again, we can now use our card to test this. So I'll take off the revenue and then push in cost of goods sold. So we realize that we have 1.69, okay, which is just as we have it here. Okay, now in our layout, after calculating revenue and cost of goods sold, we are going to calculate gross profit. Okay, so this is also going to be calculated. So again, I'll start a new measure. So this is going to be gross profit. Now for gross profit, we are going to subtract revenue. So I'll call revenue. Okay, and then because of the sign of cost of goods sold, we'll use plus here and then call cost of goods sold. So this is going to give us the gross profit at this third level. Okay, so when I press enter, again, I can take off cost of goods sold and then replace that with gross profit, which will give me some 5 million because we already have 6.7. You take off 1.69, eyeballing, you realize that you have 5.2. So that's how we are going to proceed. So we now have our first 3 lines in our income statement. Next up, let's calculate our expenses. Okay, so for expenses, same method. I'll start my measures, new measure. It opens up the formula bar and then I'm going to call this expenses. And and then I'll paste this calculate and then change revenue to expenses. So we are doing this so that we can have all the lines of our income statement ready, and then we can create it using these measures. So from expenses, we get our earnings before interest and tax. So that again is going to be another calculation. So I'm going to call this EBIT, okay, which at this point is going to be gross profit plus expenses, again because of the sign. Okay, so EBIT is going to be on standby. Then after EBIT, we calculate our finance cost. So new measure. So we have our finance costs here. So again, that is going to be another calculate. We have all these in the journal and in the chart of accounts. Okay, so we have finance costs. Okay, so again, finance costs ideally should be negative, so we are going to use this to calculate our net income before tax, that is subtracting finance costs from EBIT. So I'll right click, new measure, and then again I'm going to name this net income before tax. Okay, so we have EBIT plus finance cost. Okay, so making use of the signs, we are using the plus sign to have our subtraction done. Okay, so after net income before tax, we now calculate our tax. So on the assumption using Ghana's rate of 25%, if net income before tax is positive, we are going to create this measure using an if formula. Okay, so I'll right click and then I'll name this tax. Okay, so tax is equal to an if. So if net income before tax is greater than 0, okay, we want to multiply, again negating net income before tax by 0.25%, otherwise return 0. Okay, so we are being consistent by putting a negative sign here. So I'll just press enter, and then we have our tax calculated. So after our tax, we now have our net income. So this new measure, we have our net income, which is going to be the net income before tax plus tax, which we just calculated. Okay, and then I'll press enter. Okay, so I just want to test that last net income calculation, which will give us some 968 here. So that is the final net income for the 2 years in our data set, but we are going to work backwards and then create our income statement now that we have all these lines calculated. Let's take a brief look at our finished work. So we want to create this part of the dashboard. Now you observe that all the lines of the income statement are here. We've calculated all of them, but in our current list of fields, we don't have this layout present. Okay, so in Power BI, we can create this layout, okay, that we are going to use in our income statement, okay, and then later connect it with the measures that we just did. Okay, so that's a very simple process. So what we are going to do is to type it out in Excel. Okay, if you have it already, you can just copy and paste it. So I'm going to use the format of our income statement to lay out the labels. So I have the layout of our income statement typed already in Excel. Again, you could have lifted this as part of the data. If you have your balance sheet as well, you can do same. But what is important is that we have the layout the way we want it. So I'm going to call this category, and then I need a way to sort this. Okay, so that revenue always starts and then we end with net income in that order. Okay, so I'm going to use sequence to just assign 9 numbers here. So this is what will help us always sort this the way it should appear. Okay, so I'm going to copy this. Okay, so that's one direct way to do that. Of course, you could also use get data to lift it here. And then I'm going to use the enter data option. So I'll click the enter data option as a way to bring in this layout. Okay, so click on the column 1 and then paste this. Okay, so this is one layout I'm bringing into our field list. I'm going to name this layout. Okay, and I'll load this directly. Okay, so once it's loaded, you see this is now part of our tables here. Okay, and then it has our 2 columns, category and sort. So let's attempt to create our income statement. So I'm going to push this somewhere here and then move away the category we have in our chart of accounts. Okay, and then bring in this category that we just created. Okay, so it gives us something like this. Of course, it's not sorted properly, and that is why we brought in this sort column. So you can select the category, okay, and when the column tools pop up, okay, you can choose sort by column, and we use that sort column to order the category properly. So I'll choose sort, and then it will use the 1 to 9 arrangement to sort this. Okay, so this is the basis for our income statement. Okay, so let's go back. Now, the next thing we need to do is to link these calculations that we did, which is the income statement lines, okay, to these lines. Okay, so currently reporting value is showing 0, but we don't need reporting value. We need each item to connect to the label that it corresponds to. Okay, so to do that, we are going to create a new measure. The concept is simple. We are going to use selected value, okay, and then we'll declare a variable that would use these categories, okay, as basis to connect using the filter context. Okay, so let's do this. I'll take it slowly so that you can follow. So I'm going to click on new measure. This we are going to call current. Okay, so our goal here is to create these values for the current year, and then after we'll create a previous out of it. Okay, so current is equal to, because it's going to be a long formula, I need to format this, so shift enter. Okay, so I'm going to use shift enter and then first declare a variable. Okay, so the variable is going to say that if I select any current category, okay, so this is current category, which could be any of these. Okay, I'm going to set it to selected value. Okay, so selected value from the layout table which we just brought in, and category. Okay, so this can be any of these, and we are going to use these 9 lines to do that. Now I'm going to declare a second variable which is going to return our amount. So I will use shift enter, and then I'll declare another one called amount. So amount is going to be any of these measures that we created. So to assign the value to each condition, which is the selected value up here, I'm going to use switch. Okay, so switch, and then I'll set this to true, open and close bracket. Okay, then I'll bring a comma, so shift enter. So let me just tap this in. So essentially what we are going to say here is that if the current category, that is what is selected, is equal to revenue, okay, then the result is going to be the revenue that we just calculated. Okay, so we are going to use this to map. Essentially that's how we are going to do it. Okay, so I'll bring my comma. Here's my first Okay, so because we are going to be using this, I'm going to copy this expression, okay, and then repeat it for all the 9 lines. Okay, so Shift Enter, I'll paste this. If what you have selected is equal to cost of goods sold, then this should be cost of goods sold. So by now you get a pattern, right? I'll bring a comma, Shift Enter, paste this one. The next one is gross profit. So at the point, I'm going to fast forward this and then show you the final formula. So we have our gross profit here. Okay, so you realize that I've provided for all the lines from revenue all the way to net income. Okay, so in conclusion, we are now going to set the final result to 0. Okay, so if none of these are matched, you now make that final result 0. Okay, so Shift Enter and then Shift Tab to reverse the indent, and I'm now going to return, okay, the amount that I set here as the conclusion of my measure. Okay, so I will now set this amount here. Okay, so that's it. So you can follow this slowly. So that's our formula. So with this, when I press Enter, I expect that when I push this measure into our layout, we should have our income statement completed. So let's see what we get. So I'll press Enter. So we have this as current. So now our layout is on standby. So I've selected this, then I'll click on current, and then you see it just creates our income statements, and all our totals also fit in. So revenue, cost of goods sold, expenses, EBIT, tax. Okay, we can take off the total later when we are working on our visual, but essentially that is the idea. Okay, so now that we've calculated current, let's use a time intelligence function to create the same thing for previous. Okay, so it's going to be a new measure, and this is going to be calculate. Okay, and then I'll call this current measure, which is currently showing the cumulative numbers, but when we put in our slicer, we just get the current numbers. Okay, so current, and we are going to use same period last year, okay, on our calendar date column. Okay, so I'm going to close this. So this is always going to give us the previous year's numbers for our income statement. So I'll press Enter. Okay, so let's bring in our previous numbers while the matrix is selected. Okay, so again we have something like this, but as I said, without our year slicer, this is cumulative, this is last year's numbers. Okay, so to get our current year's numbers, I'm going to bring in the slicer for our year. So I'll deactivate the selection and then go into our calendar table. Okay, but before that, select the slicer visual. So I'll click on this, okay, and then check year, okay, which gives us our 2 years. Now the setting to make this a list or a tile has moved to the format of visual settings. So while this is selected, I'll go to slicer settings, and then instead of between, I'll set this as a tile. Okay, so if I adjust this, I now can select 2020. Okay, and then I have my 2 numbers here. So this, with the slicer selected, will show us the current year and then the previous year. Okay, so let's calculate our percentage change between these two. So to do that, we'll create a new measure. So I right click, new measure. Okay, so here we call this percentage change, and this is going to use divide. Okay, so we use divide, and we are going to call our current Okay, subtract our previous. Okay, so that is going to be our numerator, and then our denominator is going to be absolute of previous. Okay, so this is to take care of situations where a previous negative number goes positive. Okay, and then the alternate result, that's why we are using divide, is 0. Okay, so we'll close this. Okay, so now we can enter and then change the formats for this to a percentage. Okay, so once we have this, we can now draw this into our matrix. So I'll put in the change here. Okay, so let me go into focus mode. So you realize that it calculates our percentage change. Now we want to visualize this. Okay, so positive will be green, negative will be red. Okay, so to do that, we can now go into our matrix visual. Okay, come down here and apply a conditional format on this percentage change field. So before we proceed, let's do a little formatting on our visual. So I'll select this matrix, come and then take off the row subtotals, okay, so that the subtotals go off. I'll come to the values section and then increase this to about 12. Okay, do same for the column and row headers, so that is also going to be 12. Okay, and then our row headers, I'll also set this at 12. Okay, so this is our main visual. Now apart from this, we are going to change the theme, okay, to the classic theme. Okay, so I'm going to click on the classic theme. This gives us the default red and green to help us format this percentage change. Okay, so when we do that and we come back to the field section, we can now apply data bars to show green for positive change and then red for negative. So on the percentage change, I'll drop this down, go to conditional formatting, select data bars. Okay, and the classic theme gives us the default green for positive and then the red for negative. I'll choose to show the bar only. Okay, and then I'll click OK. Okay, so when I do that, I have this nice visual showing us the changes for each line. Okay, so this completes that part of our visual. Okay, so at this point we can now move to the other segment. So the next thing we need to do is to calculate our net income margin, and then we'll create these 9 tiles for each line in our income statement. So to calculate this visual, which will show us the net income margin for any selection that we do here, we need to calculate our measure, and that measure is going to be net income over revenue. Then when we are done, we would also calculate for the inverse, which will help us create this chart, and then we'll proceed and complete it with a card. Okay, so let's do that. So again, I'll come to my measures, right click, new measure. Okay, so we are going to name this net income margin. So this is going to be equal to net income margin, and it's going to be this simple calculation of net income divided by revenue. This should be saved as a percentage. So I'll press enter. Now I can select this and then format this as a percentage. Okay, now let's be sure we have calculated the right thing. So I'll test this with a card. So I'll bring this card here, and then we have net income margin, which is currently showing 11.45. But we need to calculate the inverse. Okay, so the 1 minus this, which is going to be the other part of the chart. So again, I will right click. Okay, so just to make sure I can identify it, so I'll call this inverse net margin, and that's going to be 1 minus the net income margin that I just calculated. Okay, so again, this is always going to give us the other part of the donut chart. Okay, so as we did for net income margin, I'm going to again select this and then format this as a percentage as well. Okay, so I'm going to convert this visual into a donut chart. Okay, and then when I add the inverse, okay, I get this net income margin right here. So in terms of formatting this, we would select this visual, come to the format, your visual icon, okay, turn off the detailed labels, okay, and then in the slices, we'll open this up, we'll leave this green for the net income margin, and then set this at the first light gray here. Okay, so once we've done that, we can also come to the general and then turn off the title. Okay, so we have this clean donut chart. Okay, so in our final visual, we want to fit this somewhere below our earlier charts. So I'm going to do that and put it on standby. We have some finishing touches that we'll do. So these two elements are now ready. So the last set in our visualization is to create these 9 cards or tiles, which is going to take each line in our income statement, compare current and previous. Okay, and then we'll bring in our slices. Okay, so we are the heart of our visualization, and one useful trick that you can use to design your Power BI visuals is to get a very nice PowerPoint background. Okay, so for this dashboard, we've put together this background, which is mainly going to give us guidance on where to fit each KPI. So when it's in PowerPoint, you can save it. So I'm going to do that. Okay, and then save it as an SVG file. So I'll come here and then save this as a scalable vector graphic format. Okay, so this is how. So I'll confirm just this one. Okay, so now when I come to my Power BI, it is this background that is going to form the layout for all these KPIs. It makes the work easy. Okay, so let me show you how you can import this. So clicking in the canvas, okay, you have your format your report page icon here, and then you have the option to change your canvas background. So I would browse for the image which I have saved here. Okay, so I'll just click it. Now when it comes in, you would have to reduce the transparency to 0. Okay, so when you do that, now you have your background nicely here. The headers and margins are already here, so you see that I have net income, the headers here. So let's now attempt to fit in. So I'll just go in and then fit. Okay, so I have fit in the matrix. I've also brought in our donut chart using the background as a guide. Now if you look at the finished work, we had our profit margin showing in the middle of the net income margin donut chart. So this is going to be created with a simple card. So I would insert that card here. Okay, so I'll just reduce it a bit, come to my measures, and then insert the net income margin. Okay, so again I'll format this using the format your visual. Okay, so the color value, I'll just reduce it a bit and then bolding this, and then take off the category label to give it some space. So I have something like that. Okay, so this way we can now have the dynamic display of the net income margin. Okay, so that completes these two visuals. Now let's concentrate on these 9 tiles that will give us some detail on the current and previous numbers for each line in the income statement. Okay, so to do that, let me show you the finished work. We are going to calculate the current for revenue, which is going to be a simple calculate formula, and then we also calculate for previous. Then we already have the percentage change between the 2 years, and then we will bring in this custom sparkline from OKVis. In Power BI, beyond the default visuals, you can also bring in some of these custom visuals. Okay, so you can get it from the app source. Okay, so what I have here is sparkline by OKVis. I would import this, and then we'll complete one set. Okay, we'll group it, and then we'll paste it for the rest of the sets, and then our job here is pretty done. Okay, so let's go through the first set. Okay, so I'm going to bring in my visual, and to do that I'll click on these 3 dots. Okay, I have it saved, so I'll import this. So this is sparkline by OKVis, and I'll click open to bring it here. Okay, so I get this indicator that this was successfully imported. Now this I'm going to use to draw my sparklines. Okay, so let's begin by calculating current revenue. Then we'll calculate previous, and then percentage change, and then we create our sparkline for this first set. So because we have a tall list of measures here, I'm going to create another table to host what I will call KPIs for income statement. Okay, so as we did earlier, I'll come to modeling, then I will use new table. When it pops up, simply going to call this KPIs. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, equal to nothing, so this is going to be an empty table. Okay, so for this to move up, we have to at least assign one measure here. So I'm going to right click and then choose new measure. So when this pops up, I'm going to call this revenue current. So I'm doing it this way so that I can have all the 3 calculations for revenue listed in order. Okay, so revenue current is going to be equal to calculate. Now this set of calculations is for the current measure. Okay, so this expression is current. Okay, and I'm going to filter this by layout category. Layout category refers to this. Okay, should be equal to revenue. Okay, and then I'll close that. So this is my calculation for current revenue, and I'm going to press enter. Okay, so with this here, as we did earlier, I'm going to hide this unused column. It moves up, so I have KPIs for revenue current. Okay, so while this is here, let's create revenue previous. Okay, so I'm going to right click, and then I'll go in and then calculate revenue previous, and this again is going to be calculate. This time round, instead of picking current, I'm going to use previous, okay, for our previous year's calculations. And then here I would also filter by layout category, should be equal to revenue. Okay, so this is the pattern we are going to use for all the rest of the indicators. So this is revenue previous, and then now let's calculate the percentage change. So again, while we are here, new measure, so revenue percentage change. So again, that is going to be another calculate, and I have percentage change here, so this where the layout category is equal to revenue. Okay, and then we have that. So for this tile here, okay, we've calculated the 3 visuals we are going to use, the 3 indicators we are going to use to populate this, which is current, previous, and then the revenue percentage change. So here we'll have to find a way to fit in these 3 as we've done here. So when we are done, then we'll group it. So 3.37, 3.34, this is our percentage change, and then we'll have our sparkline. Okay, so let's do that. So these are cards. I could have used multi-row cards, but because I want to format them differently, I'll have to stack cards, individual single cards on top of each other. Okay, so I would insert this card here. We'll have to squeeze it in. Okay, requires a bit of patience. So you align this nicely here. Okay, and then you bring in revenue current. So here we will need to go into format your visual, and then in the call out value reduce this to 16. Okay, so we'll reduce this to 16, okay, to help us fit this. So while we are here, we would also go and turn off the category label, okay, and then we'll bolden this as well. Okay, so all this is to make it possible to fit in this space for current revenue. Okay, in some instances you would have to come to general, so you also have to come to general, effects, and then turn off the background if you have a white fill. Okay, so this is going to be current 3.37. now I'm going to copy this card, so Control C, Control V. Okay, now if I drag this down, okay, I can use the guides to align these two. Okay, so this is going to be for my previous. Now I will just have to come here and then switch from revenue current to revenue previous. Okay, thankfully my format is maintained. I'll come to format your visual, and then in my call out value, so I'll change this color to this shade of gray, 30% darker. So now that we have this, let's now copy and paste our third card for the percentage change. Right, so for the percentage change here, we already have it calculated, so I'm going to switch from revenue previous to revenue percentage change. Okay, so this is set at 0.01, but we need to format the measure as a percentage, so I'm going to do that. So this is going to give me 13%, so I'll format that as a percentage and then reduce this to 0 decimal place. Now we are going to apply a special conditional format to this. So if the change is positive, that is, for example, if revenue increased, we want it to be green. But the other way around, if in the current year we increased, if in the current year expenses increased, we want that to show as negative. Okay, so remember we already have this set as negative 13%. But when we are done, we would find a way to take off the sign so that this negative 13% will still read red while showing 13% without the sign. But first, let's create our conditional formatting. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to select the card. Okay, go to format your visual, and then I will come to call out value. So here I can use a formula, okay, to change the color. Okay, so I'm going to click on this FX. Okay, so here I have some options, but I'm going to change this to a rule. Okay, so I'll choose rule, and I'll go through the following rules for my red and green. So the first one is going to read if the value is greater than or equal to min, okay, and less than 0, it should give me red, which is the most important thing here for negative numbers. Then I'll choose a new rule. Okay, so the new rule says that if what I have is greater than 0, okay, so I'm going to highlight this. Okay, but less than or equal to max. Okay, so I'm going to put in max here. Okay, then this should give me green. Okay, so this way all the numbers that were negative, red, those that are positive will give me green. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. Okay, so because we had a positive change comparing our current and previous, okay, this gives me 1%. Now the last thing in the set is our spark line. So for our spark line, we are going to first insert the OKVis custom visual we brought here. So I would insert it. Okay, so it basically requires the calendar attributes, which is month names. So I'm going to choose month names here. Okay, so this gives us January to December. Then I'm going to put in our original revenue calculation. Okay, so this is what we get. Okay, so let's take off these labels. So I'll come to the format your visual option and then take off the label. Of course, I'm going to squeeze this in. Okay, so for the space that I have allotted for this is going to fit in like that. The good thing about these visuals is that it shows you the high and low points within the 12 months that you are displaying. Okay, so we now have the full set of visuals for each indicator. It makes our work easy. So instead of doing this from scratch, we are going to group this together. So to do that, you can just use your mouse and then just hover. Okay, so you realize that it groups all, it selects all these. Okay, 4 of them. We'll come to format and then we'll group this. Okay, so this way we can now take this and then move it around easily for the rest. So I'm going to show you how we can copy and then paste this for cost of goods sold and then make the changes. There will be a few changes in the calculation for the signs, the negative and positive, but once we are done with this, the rest will be the same. Okay, so let me take this group. So I'm going to select it, Control C, Control V, and using the guide, I will just pull this one. Okay, so it's well aligned. Okay, so when it's like this, you just have to double click. Okay, so you click the first one, the group is selected, and then you double click to select the card that you are interested in, and then you can make the changes from here. So let's quickly calculate our cost of goods sold as we did for revenue. So again, 3 sets, but mind you, when it comes to cost of goods sold, we have a minus sign here. So we'll have to create this using the ABS function to get rid of the minus sign. Okay, so let's proceed and calculate for cost of goods sold. So again, I'm going to right click, new measure. So this is a set for cost of goods sold. So this is cost of goods sold current. So this is going to be calculate. Okay, my expression is going to be current, and then here layout category should be equal to cost of goods sold. Okay, and then I'll close my bracket from here. So I was saying that this is going to give me a negative value. Okay, so I'm going to put around the formula an ABS function. So essentially what we are going to do is for all the lines that are negated, we would create the formula with an ABS. Okay, so please note that. So I'll click OK. Okay, so while we are here, let's complete this. I'm going to copy this part to make it easier. Okay, so Control C, and then we'll come in here, right click, new measure, and then this is cost of goods sold previous. Okay, so I'll paste this, and then guess what I have to change current to previous. That easy. Okay, I'll still maintain this, and then I'll press enter. Okay, then the third and final one in this list is I'm going to right click, new measure. Okay, and then it's cost of goods sold percentage change, and that is going to be ABS I'll move out the current and then put in percentage change, and then I have that. Okay, so we now have this set. Now let me show you how you are going to change this. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll double click. Okay, so once this is selected, I'll take off revenue current and then put in cost of goods sold current. Okay, so this gives me 89477k without the sign. Okay, then I'll go to the next one. So again, I'll switch from the revenue, and then I'll choose this as well. So this gives me that for the previous. Okay, then I'll come to the third one, cost of goods sold percentage change. Okay, so let's do a little work on this. Now with the cost of goods sold percentage change, first we have to format this as a percentage, right? So we'll do that and then reduce this to 0 decimal place. Okay, now because we use the ABS function, it is returning a positive 13%. Okay, but this change, because it's an increase in expense, is not good. Okay, so first we are going to take off the ABS calculation for this particular expense. Okay, so when I take off, it should now show us minus 13%, right? But here it is still showing green, because if we go back to format your visual, okay, in the call out value, if I go to my FX, you realize that it's still pointing to revenue percentage change. So please remember to come here, okay, and then change it to the current measure. Okay, so this way, that's minus 13% will pick up this new row and then it will turn red. Okay, now we don't want to see the sign even though it has turned red. So one quick way you can do this is to go to the data model. Okay, so we'll go to the data model, and then here we have the measure selected. We'll go to the properties, okay, and change the format from percentage to custom, right? So once we change it from percentage to custom, we see the format to display positive, negative, 0. Okay, so all we need to do is to take off the sign in the second instance after the semicolon. So this way, negative numbers, even though they are negative, will still appear without the sign. Okay, so that's one trick you can use to still maintain that red conditional formatting for negative numbers while taking off the sign. So you realize that our red still shows here, okay, and the sign is off. Okay, so after changing our current, our previous, and then the change for cost of goods sold, the last element we need to change for this set is the spark line. Remember, we copied the revenue for cost of goods sold, so we need to go select the spark line. Okay, so you realize that it uses two fields here. So you realize that it uses the field from calendar, which is month name. We are going to maintain that. Okay, so the measure we need to change from revenue to costs of goods sold. Right, so after doing this set, all we need to do now is to repeat this set for the rest of the tiles. Okay, so I'm going to begin. I'll select the cost of goods sold. Okay, so this is grouped. I'll copy and then I'll paste this. Okay, and then as we did earlier, move this to the right. Okay, using the guides to align. Okay, and then we calculate the three sets: current, previous, and percentage change. This time around for gross profit. Okay, and then we go through the process. So I'm going to run through this quickly now that you have the pattern. So I'll proceed and do all the calculations for the rest, and then copy and paste through, make the changes. And once we are done, we work on our slicers and our journey is complete. Okay, so we are almost there, and I'm now going to bring in the slicers for division and month names. Alright, so let me just position this. So I'll select this and then go to format your visual, go straight to the values. Okay, scroll down, and then I have background, which allows me to set the color. So I'm going to change the color to this blue color. So I have the hex code here. Okay, so this is the blue color, and here I'm going to change the font color to white. Right, so this is how my slicer is going to look. The default black and white for the selected portion, and then blue and white for the unselected portion. Okay, so let's bring in a new slicer for division. So I'll click on this slicer. Okay, let me position it above here, and I'm going to populate this with a division. Okay, so it comes here. Now, because I've done this formatting already, I'll just select this, click on the format painter, and then apply this here. Okay, so once this is done, I will just squeeze this in and then push it a bit to the left, open it up for my header. Okay, and then I can now align it here. So that completes my division slicer. The last slicer I want to bring in is the slicer for month names. Okay, so for month names, again, I'm going to start with a slicer placeholder. So that is going to take this space here. Okay, now that is going to be populated with the calendar month names. Okay, so when I do that, it goes down, but as we did earlier, I'm going to select this format and then click the format painter and apply it here. Okay, so this way I can now have all my months displayed from January to December. Obviously this is sorted alphabetically instead of chronologically, so we need to sort this by the month values. So to do that, I'm going to select this month name. Okay, and then in the column tools I have sort by column, and remember we created a month value column that has 1 to 12, so we are going to use this to properly order our months. Okay, so once I do that, on refresh, this should arrange properly starting from January to December. Okay, so that completes our dashboard. Now if I select by division, okay, or by month name, I should get the performance for that particular division. Okay, showing me the current and previous, the net income, and then a detailed insight on each of the lines in my income statement. Okay, so I hope it has been an exciting journey for you. So this is one of many dashboards we are going to be releasing to help you build your Power BI skills. You can subscribe to our channel so you can get notification. In the meantime, please practice and add it to your Power BI skills. Thank you so much for coming along, and thank you for watching. If this video was helpful and you would like to receive more of these videos directly on your WhatsApp, you can send ad to this WhatsApp number. We'll add you to our broadcast list so you receive our videos directly. You can also visit our YouTube channel, Finest Skills Hub. All our old videos are here. Please subscribe for notification of new videos, or connect with us on any of these social media handles. Thank you so much for watching.